Welcome back. You're watching The Globe. Thousands of campaigners have taken to the streets of Glasgow in Scotland. They're demanding decisive action from world leaders against climate change. This at the UN climate conference COP26. Inside the summit, civil society leaders have taken over discussions at the end of a week of government speeches and pledges, which included promises to phase out coal. In spite of the promises, youth campaigners have been sceptical about the political will among the leaders. Campaigners say that they've been underwhelmed by the commitments made so far, many of which are voluntary or with deadlines that are set for decades away. Even COP26 President Alok Sharma has called on negotiations to step up the pace to ensure a successful outcome. As the first week of talks draws to a close, young people say that they'll carry on fighting. The summit is seeking to raise enough commitment from world leaders to limit the global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius, and that's 2.7 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. Well, somebody who's there in Glasgow in Scotland at COP26 is Khambule, who's a Greenpeace Africa senior political advisor, and he joins us now from frosty Scotland. Happy, thanks very much indeed for joining us. Good to have you on the programme. So it's been quite a week. From what we're reading, a lot of promises have been made, but I guess, as in previous COPs, it's only when they're acted upon do they become impressive.
Yeah, good evening to you and good evening to all the viewers. I think the promises, if we contextualize what they are, those are the promises which are more political in nature, where essentially after what the UK has been able to produce is to get a bunch of promises in terms of how it's going to be dealing with carbon emissions, but its own presidency as to how it's going to ensure that progress occurs. So what we are seeing or what we are encountering is that the pace of the political discussion is not the same pace that you're finding in the actual negotiations, and that's where the problem comes in.
So renowned climate activist Greta Thunberg says that this conference is a PR event. Is that how it's feeling for you?
Yeah, so I mean, we can't run away from the fact, as I just said, that because of the political momentum that's around the announcements, around the partnership like what South Africa has and what Brazil or some of the forest nations have just been able to also strike, it sounds like there's a lot of work that's happening in the background and there's a splash of all the good news. But when you get into the rooms in terms of the more nitty-gritties concerning the actual Paris Agreement and the modalities around how it works, how we're going to be counting emissions in the form in which they need to be accounted for, what kinds of plans countries are putting together outside of the political declarations, we're very far behind. And because the world is moving towards 2.7 degrees, it makes very well good sense that Greta and activists are saying that this is a talk shop in most regards. But there is some wins. The wins are more political. And in terms of the technical aspects, we're finding it very hard to find some proof.
Are you getting a different feeling at this COP, though, that at least there's an appreciation that there is a catastrophe on the way and that it's critically urgent? Even if some of the politics is getting in the way, is the message getting through now?
Yeah, no, the message is clear. And I think for more than any other COP, countries know and they are very aware that people at home, people around the COP, even internally between themselves, that there's a problem. Climate change is a thing that is happening right now. And the longer we take, the more impacts are going are going to be felt by almost everyone, if not everyone, at disproportionate rates, of course. So there is that sense of urgency. There is a sense of emergency. And the problem, again, the situation is the actual process of getting to a solution in terms of the more bureaucratic, the more UN multilateral process is not moving fast enough in line with the urgency, in line with the political declaration, in line with what we necessarily need to see.
So how do we get some equality in this whole carbon emissions story? Because you read that the top 1% of humanity, just those people alone with their yachts, their private jets and all their toys are creating so much carbon emissions, much, much more than thousands of people, perhaps on the African savannas. How do we get a balance that so few people can create so much of the problem?
And the situation is, and I think it would be the same way which we address the income inequality, the wealth gap that is there, that is prevalent, where you have the top 1% owning over 50% of the wealth of the world and using most of the resources. So it's quite tied to the amount of money, wealth, as well as the access that people have. If it were for us to try to solve it, it would be that we have to have a system change, a system which doesn't allow for such accumulation of wealth and more or less apportions a greater proportion of rewards towards people. I think that answer or that question is really hard to answer in this context, man. You could look at taxation. You could look at some form of increasing wealth tax. You could look at increasing the amount of social flaws that people have who are in the lower brackets, but it still doesn't address the problem that there is a concentration of wealth. There's a concentration of resources in the top 1%, just like there's a concentration of wealth and resources in terms of countries as well. So it is an unbalanced system, but the situation still doesn't change. We are stuck in a climate emergency. And if we don't address the wealth inequality, if we do not address the wealth gap, if we don't address the accumulation of wealth by a particular group of people, which is the 1% in any of the countries, the inequality just exacerbates the problem. And then it's going to be a hard one to anscer. That's the best way I can put it right now. Yeah.
Okay.
It's a hard one to answer.
So Fatih Birol, the director of the International Energy Agency, says that just based on the pledges and the commitments that have been put on the table just this week, that we could get temperatures down to within 1.8 degrees Celsius of pre-industrial levels. I suppose what I'm asking is, it sounds as if there is a plan. Is it doable even if we had the will?
The plan is doable, and we've got the technology, we've got the capacity, the mechanisms in order to achieve it are there. And the question of political will is what we're actually seeing now is becoming more and more prevalent, and we're seeing elements of a positive side of the political will. And in your previous question, you indicated the other side of the political will, which is, there's still a structural issue that we need to address. But if we look at all the pledges that have been put forward throughout this week, we have to look at them in conjunction with the national development plans or the nationally determined contributions. So there has to be an additionality on top of the pledges. They themselves are not enough. So all the plans that we have domestically as South Africa, including what we've put on in terms of the deal that we've just struck with the different countries into helping us decarbonize, will help us move to 1.8 degrees, as you put it, but we need to move to 1.5. And that means that there's going to be a greater need for additionality. Where it comes from is particularly the question for further discussion.
All right. Help us understand, especially those that are not really following this, the deals that have been signed for South Africa. We see that billions of dollars potentially are coming our way. How will that change the landscape in South Africa? I mean, right now we've got Eskom busy trying to fix its coal plants.
Yeah, so that's the main thing, right? Is that our energy security is at risk. So we've got coal plants. A heavy reliance of our energy infrastructure is largely coal, and it's falling apart. So and we know that the world is moving away from coal. So if you're producing products and you've got services that are derived from coal, you're going to be priced out from the rest of the world. In fact, people are not going to want to get what you're producing. So what the deal allows us to do is for like Eskom and the country itself to be able to access the kinds of funds that it was unable to access because of the fiscal position that Eskom is in, as well as the fact that it's got a heavy reliance on coal and potentially large stranded assets. The deal allows us to access funds. The deal allows us to also leverage other funds like domestically that would allow us to become much more competitive, as well as move towards renewable energy in a more managed as well as in a transitional manner. The problem that we've had all this time is that we've had renewable energy coming onto the grid, but we hadn't looked at it at a systems-wide level or at a country-wide level, and that's what this deal allows us to do. When you undertake a project of decommissioning, what are you going to replace it with in that local community where a lot of the services and the socio-economic benefits are derived from coal? And then the deal basically provides for the things that are normally funded. You can fund technology, but the socio-economic infrastructure that is set up around technology investments or technology deployment, that's not something that is funded. And that's what the deal allows us to be able to also unlock.
Happy Khambule, thanks very much indeed for giving us that update, and I hope we can chat again as some more of these deals, promises and discussions evolve. Thank you so much for today's update.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so that's Greenpeace Africa's Happy Khambule speaking to us there from Glasgow in Scotland at COP26. And just give you a very quick summary of the things that happened today at COP26. Thousands of young people marched in central Glasgow saying that the discussions are just not committed enough. Greta Thunberg herself saying that this is an entire PR event, so concerns about commitments there. Scientists revealed that carbon dioxide emissions of the richest 1% of people in the world are said to be 30 times greater than what is compatible with keeping the global heating down below 1.5%. So just 1% of humanity, 30 times greater. We also found out today, John Kerry, the envoy, US climate envoy, said that $100 billion that's been promised by rich nations to poor nations can now be delivered by 2022. All right, so that's just a few notes about what happened at COP26 today. But please stay tuned to the channel. Over the weekend, we'll carry on giving you crossings and updates on this very important global conversation.